Like all the best things in the world, today we're starting with a thought experiment. Recently, for the last few months, I've been sending all my packages with little sort of gift labels, little personalised miniature cards. And I'll often draw something like this on them. So this is a little croissant, and next to that croissant is a cup of coffee. And it's just simple shapes. And yeah, I think it's quite fun. I certainly enjoy making them. And I think you can tell what it is, especially if you give the barest hint. I might write a morning breakfast or something like that upon my little card. And then it becomes really apparent to me, and I hope to others, what this very simple drawing is. And the same idea can be expanded to landscapes and urban things. Take, for example, a lighthouse. One can tell from a very simple set of marks on the page what the artist, in this instance being me, is trying to convey. And that got me thinking, why isn't it always this easy? And especially why, when we pick up our little reference, we look at our lighthouse, our church, maybe we look at our cup of coffee and our croissant, that we suddenly get stuck into drawing all the details and getting lost and actually losing what it is that we are trying to achieve. So, for the rest of this video, we'll stop our thought experiment and I'll just talk through some ways of thinking that I apply to simplify things, to make quirky little doodles as well as bigger, more freeform art. The first thing I sort of realise I do is I don't look at individual bits. I try and avoid seeing, for example here, some houses. Instead, focus on what is the overall shape. And the overall shape means that you capture the sort of the bigger form, not the individual little bits which make up the house, but the entire ridgeline of all of the houses. From there, you can find the slightly smaller shapes which sit underneath this ridgeline. So we've got three sort of rectangles or squares coming along. And then we can see the other still big shapes which sit under that. And instead of going, oh, it's a house, it's a rectangle, suddenly we see that this whole shape is more of a triangle with its sort of nose cut off at the end. And suddenly we have the idea of all of these houses. So what I've done here is focus on the collection, not trying to find the individual shapes within a house, but just, even if I squint and look at the reference, what do I actually see? What's the clearest bit that I see first? Turn that into a shape in my mind or a simple line in my mind, and then the scene can kind of unfold naturally. Similarly, there's lots of trees here, but what kind of shapes are they making? And then we end up with something which just goes on our page. Then take a step back. Do we have some houses? No, not yet. We have the right starting point, the right frame. But with my little step back, recognizing we're not there yet, we just add a little bit more. So we find some of the next size of shapes down. Not overdoing things, just finding a few of these little shapes. So we've got things which we'll dare to call windows, but are just basically shapes on the page. And I'm not trying to draw what I think I can see. I'm trying to draw only what I can really actually see. And that's a hard distinction to make sometimes. And now, do we have some houses? Pretty much. Is there anything obvious extra that I can see? Not really. They're not fully there yet. And what else did I do here to just bring my silly little creations to life? Well, look, we've got a variety of line, haven't we? That's the thing missing here. So we started here with freeform shapes. We added little extra details, little bits of extra marks, but then we added some extra bolder lines. So I can now come back and just go, right, which are the important lines where's the contrast in the scene, and I can also just refine a few little shapes. And like that, I'm hoping, as if by magic, my little thought experiment will lead us to actually creating something which really does feel like a row of houses. And I can find, as I'm elaborating on my original marks, I can find a few extra bits in here as well. So there's some extra little details, and I can add some of the extra details in the foreground, little bits of just this kind of almost linear marks and dots formed by where the snow ruffles. And there now, I've got what I think is an acceptable representation of those houses, and I enjoyed myself. There's other steps, there's little things which we haven't done here, but what I could have done here, I could have imagined a sort of light source, and that might have given me some shadows, particularly under where the sort of rolls of the croissant are, maybe even coming down the side of the croissant, and then the same in the cup of coffee. We'd end up with bits of shadow there. Now in the photo, we already have that value laid out for us. We can see light and dark, and if we squint, we can see light and dark even more easily. And that might lead us to applying some hatching. Really simple hatching, not focusing on anything except the lightest bit and the darkest bit. Now in this photo, terrible photo, we've got basically the darkness all across the front of these buildings. There's little suggestions of deep shadow in a couple of other places, but actually there's not much else apart from that, is there? We got little white bits for some of the frames as well, and we can make that kind of stand out if we just apply some contrast within the frames. But again, that is it. That is kind of our simple representation of that scene. So let's apply these same ideas to another couple of, well, ideas. I just wanted to take 10 seconds of your time to let you know, if you enjoy this style of teaching, if you want to learn to simplify even more and enjoy sketching even more, then you can find my classes, my courses linked in the description below. And with our next idea, which is this interesting little butcher shop in a small village, also in the north of England, I want to approach another way to really make life easy and simplify. It'd be very tempting with this sort of zoomed in picture to get really stuck in, and what we might do is we might grab our paper and really fill the frame. So we fill the frame and we immediately start with every single one of these bricks, and I absolutely agree, the bricks are very interesting, but in doing so there's a real risk that with all that attention to immediate detail, we are going to fill up our page, make it chaotic, and lose the essence of this place. And what have we done there compared to here and here? Well, we've just zoomed in, drawn quite big, even within what is still quite a small piece of paper. But what if we don't? What if we zoom out? What if we leave white space at the edge of our painting? So here we might start instead in the middle. So we're looking at what's the most interesting bit. We make sure that middle bit is scaled down to our page. And if it's really tiny, what's this, 2 centimeters, just under an inch, then we can't add detail. At least it gives us a little bit of a challenge to add detail. So we end up naturally leaving things quite simple, quite light, loose, simple. We can add certain degrees of detail here, again focusing on the overall shapes in the scene, but we end up with a much more, well, easy, simple scene. The other thing is, this is a reference. This is not my picture. We are looking at a photo. We're not looking at exactly what my picture needs to look like. There's some awkward perspective in there. There's loads of shells sort of tucked in here. What if we just flatten the perspective a little bit and we ignore those shells? That might just make it a little bit easier to capture our scene. And again, we can just then square things off a little bit, lose some of that challenging perspective, and even then start being able to add in a few details. Maybe at this point we've got enough confidence that we can add in a few of those bricks, and maybe even you want to go the whole hog, as it were, and add in all the bricks. But by simplifying, by sort of just taking it down a little notch in complexity, making some decisions, suddenly our scene, hopefully, is feeling a little bit easier, a little bit more approachable, and therefore you're more likely to feel good about sketching it and feel good about getting it on your page. Again, a few more bold lines to bring out the key bits of structure that are coming forwards. Little bits perhaps of hatching. And again, if you want more details, let's get a little suggestion of a basket, a little suggestion of these shelves, a little suggestion of some busyness in this shop. Because the windows are so small, I can't do a huge amount, and I'm left with a quirky little fun version of this building. We'll just add in a few more bricks, a little bit more boldness into these windows to bring out the window frames, and I'm actually going to invent the top of the building as well, which doesn't quite fit into the frame in the photo, but I think would look nice with a little bit of an extra frame on the side, and even maybe a cheeky little imagined frame to the left. Now, that all comes down to not letting your reference rule your sort of creative decision making. There are times where it's really important. You're doing a commission for someone, or you're drawing a really important scene for someone who knows it really well, in which point, yes, attention to detail, proportions, perspective, that's really important. But if we're trying to enjoy ourselves, if we're trying to create lots of little sketches, if we're trying to journal our lives and our memories, I think these simplification techniques are the way to go. There are a few other specific things I like to think about with simplifying. So if we take this scene, which I think is really a fascinating photo, it's also quite challenging. There's a lot going on, isn't there? But in each of these, we've been able to flatten out areas, flatten out planes, not overdo it, and understand that there's like a background, a foreground, and a middle ground. Same here. Foreground, middle ground, background. Even the same here. We've got a foreground with a few bits of hatching. We've got the middle ground. We've got a flat background. So the same here. We're going to start in the middle like we did with this chappie. And we'll get the idea of these really distant buildings. Remembering, we're trying to fit them all into the middle, but also remembering to look at shapes, and also remembering if it's not perfect, that's fine. If it just feels like the scene and isn't an exact replica of the scene, then our job is still done. And here, maybe we feel I've gone a little asymmetric. Well, we can improve our art by getting a bit more symmetry off to the other side. Then we find the shapes underneath, even a couple of tiny shapes to suggest the windows, which we can vaguely make out, can't we? We can vaguely make out the windows, a couple of chimneys in the distant scene. We can also make out some of the light and dark, which is often more easy to see in photos like this than details, and therefore a lot more important for our understanding of the scene. And then we can start to approach the idea of a background and a foreground. Now, background is loads of trees. One of the things which is tempting is to draw every single tree. But why don't we start with our principles of drawing the big shapes, going up like so. That's kind of the big shapes. Then in the foreground, we can do the same, drawing the big shapes, some of which overlap our houses, which we might want or we might not. So we can just move them a little bit. We've got also the big shapes of the lake and how that interacts with the rest of the scene. Now with that, we've got our understanding of the foreground, the midground, the background. We just perhaps want to bring out our focal area with some of those darker lines, sort of emphasizing the structure as we've been doing before. And then perhaps even the foreground needs to be a little bit bolder to bring it forward. That's not something we've talked about before, but a little bit more boldness just brings that foreground into the foreground, as it were. We can see more when we are looking at closer objects. Things are bolder, the contrasts are bolder. So just getting that effect can be really useful. Again, focusing on what the image needs, not necessarily what is truly 100% there in the reference, which is only a reference. Then the background, well, it seems a bit weird at the moment, doesn't it? You can't tell exactly what kind of background this is, but there are simple techniques like doing gentle linear hatching, which just flattens out an area, but also shows you it is a continuous area. So now we have this continuous area, and it's a vertical area most likely because we've got vertical hatching in it. That suddenly, hopefully, makes the scene feel like we want to, a simple version of our photo. Now, when you've had a bit of fun and you're contentedly doodle your way through a few scenes, one other thing I'd really love to see you try is to just see how little you can get away with. So for a scene, what do you actually need to tell the story of that scene? So here I've got this flowing kind of wall, and how much do I need to make this wall a wall? I think it's quite a classic dry stone wall, so I'm getting the idea from just those marks. Then how much do I need to make this a road? I reckon just a sort of swooping round perspective probably makes it a road. And then how much do I need to get the idea of these distant hills and the trees which are kind of looming over? And perhaps this is literally enough. We could maybe add a few little marks here and there, and we'll get some more of that variety in for sure. And simple things like these road side sort of telephone wires or electricity wires can add a little bit of something about the place as well. But it's an interesting experiment to see how little can you get away with and still make a scene. And like that, I just have one teeny little piece of paper left. And on that, I will bid you goodbye with a happy little snowman waving his arms around, where I started my doodling adventure, keeping things simple, a couple of extra bold lines, a little bit of hatching, and just thinking about that foreground, that middle ground, and that background. And since this video is coming out just before Christmas, hopefully that's a nice little send-off and a nice happy Christmas to everyone watching.